Good evening, class. Hope you've been having a successful time studying for your quiz this week. Thought I'd spend just a few minutes, and again, the quiz is going to be over chapter 7, 8, and 9. Thought I'd spend just a few minutes going through a couple of notes and comments that I've jotted down just to kind of help stimulate the review process. And a couple of things that I want to make sure that, and again, I go through this multiple times, in videos and when we're talking with these other chapters, always remember the three pillars of economic thought: opportunity cost, right? Self-interest and optimization, making decisions at the margin. Extremely important. Don't ever forget those. Always keep them in your toolbox. Also, make sure in your toolbox you have access to the marginal decision rule. Marginal benefit greater than marginal cost, keep on doing it. Marginal benefit less than marginal cost, you stop doing it. You are maximized, or net benefits are maximized when marginal benefit equals marginal cost. And I say marginal benefit for a consumer, we're talking about utility. If you're talking about a production firm, you're talking about revenues. You may be talking about profits. So you just want to make sure that you understand that marginal decision rule, because firms and consumers both are making decisions at the margin constantly, day after day, multiple times during the day. One of the things that we also talk about is the law of diminishing utility. And it's the tendency of marginal utility to decline, remember, beyond some level of consumption during a period. So that is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Everybody remember that? And if you're trying to, whether it's looking at a graph or somebody gives you a group of numbers, I had a professor in graduate school at Ohio State. I always like to give, when he had me doing his work as a TA, he really loved examples to give students on a test. He'd give them a bunch of numbers, say, okay, what does this mean with the law of diminishing marginal utility? And it's not, again, don't make things more difficult than they are. Sit down, take a look at the numbers, and start calculating the marginal utility. If the marginal utility is going up, so calculate those differentials. And if the marginal utility is going up, it hasn't started diminishing yet, you've got to see it go up and at some point start coming down. And that's going to be, the example of law of diminishing marginal utility. We've talked multiple times about, this econ course and concepts in microeconomics, and a lot of them are ratios. Think about how the numerator's changing, how the denominator's changing of that ratio. Are they changing? It's the same, same direction, same magnitude, as one going up, one going down. Just go back to your basic math skills and start, just start thinking through these things. The text also talked about a budget constraint. It's a restriction that total spending cannot exceed the budget available. More of some, less than others, right? You've got a budget constraint of $100 a week to spend on groceries. And that's all you can spend on groceries. And if you go into the grocery store and then you're buying, you decide this week you're going to buy more fruit. And buying more fruit means, fewer vegetables. Or buying more fruit means, fewer prepared meals. That's the concept of that budget constraint. You buy more of one thing, you got to give up some another one. Also, when you're talking about budget constraints and things like that, always don't forget the difference between normal and inferior goods. The demand curve for any type of good or service slopes down because of what? Diminishing marginal utility, substitution effect, income effect. Remember, the three drivers that are going to drive that downward sloping demand curve. Utility maximization. if you're a firm, you want the greatest profit or the greatest output for a given level of cost. If you're a individual, if you're a consumer like myself, I'm going to want the greatest total utility based on my given budget. I want to make that budget work for me. I want to make that budget provide me with the highest total number of utils or the highest number of utility, whatever that combination is for that given budget constraint. Always remember, if it's a desirable good or service, what does a rational consumer want? A rational consumer wants more than less. Again, if it's a desirable good or service. See what else we've got here. When we're talking about utility and talking about law of diminishing, marginal utility, we're talking about the indifference curves and the budget constraints. Consumer choice, they roll out three, to me, pretty basic assumptions. Rankability, I do, you do, everybody. The assumption is that we all have the ability to rank our preferences between two goods or services. I go into McDonald's. I'm going to rank Coke Zero number one. I'm going to rank a hamburger number two. And, I have a indifference curve, and I'll give up some and buy some more. But I can rank how I feel, thinking about those two goods or services. Also, again, it goes back to a rational consumer. So the second assumption is more is preferred to less. And the third assumption, it's one that most people don't think about, but it's that transitivity law that you probably had in beginning algebra that says A is greater than B, B is greater than C. Therefore, it means that A is greater than C. So, and that's the way that individuals, consumers like all of us, we're sitting there ranking our preferences, and we can come to the conclusion that as individuals, we know what our preferences are, and we know what it is that drives us to maximize our utility. The budget line, it's actually the slope of the budget line minus px over price of y. Price of x, it's the negative of the price of x over the price of y. And there's where we're talking about, these are the trade-offs between opportunity cost and market trade-offs. Remember, the model is talking about two goods or services. Again, it's a great great economic model built on some simplistic assumptions, talking about two goods. And so it is the trade-off. The indifference curve is a graphical representation showing combinations of two goods that yield equal levels of utility. The key concept here is equal levels of utility. So I can slide up and down my indifference curve, and I'm going to get the same. Let's say my indifference curve is for utility like number 80. And I'm getting 80 units for anything on this indifference curve. I can slide up and down that indifference curve with different combinations of any two goods or services and get the same level of utility. Let's see, what did I write here? Oh, basic properties of the indifference curve. It slopes down. They don't cross each other, and they're convex to the origin. So, and then remember, the optimal point of that of utility is that point where that indifference curve kisses the budget constraint or the budget line. That's where you're going to maximize your utility. That is the point. That is the combination, the trade-off, and the opportunity cost trade-offs of those two goods or services. That's where it's going to be maximized. Also, we talked about when we start talking about the labor market in short run and long run, we started talking about marginal product of labor and the average product of labor. And remember what I said, it's like your grade point average, or it's like in the World Series, they talk about batting averages. As long as that marginal product of labor is greater than the average product of labor, the average product of labor is going to be upward sloping. If the marginal product of labor is less than the average product of labor, what's going to happen? Average product of labor is downward sloping. So remember, the magnitude of the marginal product of labor isn't as important as the fact that it's either above or below the average product of labor. And remember the formulas. Average product of labor is nothing more than the total output divided by the total units of labor. We produced 100 textbooks this week, and there were 8 people on that assembly line putting those 100 textbooks together. So, what's that average product of labor? 12 and a half, right? 100 divided by 8, 12 and a half. 12 times 8 is 96. You got 4 left over. 4 divided by 8 is a half, 12 and a half. Remember, it goes back to just your basic mathematics when you're trying to calculate this information when it comes to the basics of microeconomics. Remember, this is an introductory class. We're not asking you to do high-level calculus. We're trying to get the introduction and the basic concepts and principles of microeconomics in your toolbox. And then if you decide to become an economist, you're going to get a lot farther in the weeds and a lot more detail than I'm giving you. Always remember, what are your factors of production and that production function? Labor, capital stock, natural resources, which from most firms is the land that the building is, let's say, that the production, environment sits on, the warehouse sits on, the offices set on. Technology, entrepreneurship. And when we talk about diminishing marginal return, it's the range over which each additional unit of a variable factor adds less to the total output than the previous unit. See, we're back to making decisions at the margin. In the short run, what do the factors of production look like? In the short run, you've got one of the factors of production can vary, and all the rest of them are fixed. You flip it over to the long run, and in the long run, all of the factors of production can vary because you've got a much longer time horizon. And then the law of diminishing marginal returns, the marginal product of any variable factor of production will eventually decline, assuming that the quantities of all other factors of production are fixed or unchanged. And when we go back to the total cost curve, and that's what firms are concerned about, is they're concerned about that total cost curve. They're concerned about total revenue because profit is total revenue minus total cost. Average total cost is average variable cost plus average fixed cost. So if you take the total cost, which is equal to the total variable cost plus the total fixed cost, and divide those by what? Output, you're going to get the average factor. You're going to get the average metrics for them. As output increases, average total cost and average variable cost curves start to converge because average fixed cost is being reduced as you increase output. And why is that? Remember, one variable, one factor of production can vary. Everything else is fixed. That total fixed cost, your fixed cost, we always go through that. I always go through this. Your total fixed costs are fixed. They're not allowed to change. Remember, ceteris paribus, all of the things unchanged. The difference between the average total cost and the average variable cost curves decline as output increases. And why is that? Average total cost and average variable cost, those curves are going to start converging, because as you increase output, your average fixed cost is going to continue to go down. Remember, your fixed cost is constant, unchanged. The more output you add, so the more the denominator increases, the more that revenue or the more that ratio does what? It decreases. So if you start like this and those curves are coming down, they're going to start converging like this as you go out over the realm of output or over the range of output, because your total fixed cost is unchanged. You're dividing it by an increasing number of units of output. And because of that, that ratio is going to decline, and your average fixed cost will decline, and it's going to bring that average total cost and average variable cost curves closer and closer together as you go down through there. Let's see what I've got here. Oh, now we're going to jump into perfect competition. Remember, perfect competition, what? Large number of buyers and sellers, homogeneous product, complete market information, and my favorite, easy to enter and exit. And as the authors will tell you, no market perfectly meets these assumptions. So those are the assumptions of your perfect competition, and no market perfectly meets these assumptions. But in the economist realm, they do. Because as an economist, I don't want to say we can make up whatever we want to, but as an economist, we can determine the assumptions that we're building our model based on. Profit maximizing in the short run depends on two things. What two decisions does a firm have to make in the short run that's maximizing profits? How much to produce? How to price it? Remember, competitive market, short run or long run, market determines the price, right? Equilibrium price driven by supply and demand. Adam Smith's invisible hand. Doesn't really matter from my perspective how you look at it. Market forces are going to drive that supply and demand curve in such a way that it's going to arrive at the equilibrium price and quantity. We mentioned it, or I mentioned it a few minutes ago, profits equal to total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is price times quantity. Total cost is price times quantity. And so profit maximizing firms are going to want to generate as much revenue as possible for as low a cost as possible. Economic profit maximized by the vertical distance between the total revenue and the total cost curves. Profit maximizing level of quantity is marginal revenue equal marginal cost as long as it's greater than what? Minimum average variable cost. Firms will continue to produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. If marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, you keep producing. An increase in output will be a positive effect on total revenue. Remember, you're going to continue to produce, continue to drive output until marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Remember the marginal decision rule? Marginal revenue, as long as it's greater than marginal cost, right? You keep on producing. And in that vein, if you continue to increase revenue, it's going to have a bigger impact on your margin, on your total revenue than it is on total cost. In the short run, economic loss, total cost is greater than total revenue. Firms in a short run have two decisions to make: continue to produce or shut down. Remember, in the short run, One factor is allowed to vary and everything else is fixed. So in an economic loss, as long as the price is greater than the average variable cost, you will continue to produce. Economic profit, total revenue is a straight line with fixed slope. Total cost on the graph, if you look in the text, total cost is going to intersect the y-axis at the total fixed cost. Remember, total fixed cost, not allowed to vary in the short run. And that is going to wrap it up on the review. There have been a lot of information, I won't say kind of thrown at you, but provided in chapters 7, 8, and 9. A lot of somewhat complicated concepts. But remember, when you go in to take your quiz, and if what especially, think your way through it. And if you need to, draw you some graphs, draw some pictures. And if there's mathematics involved or mathematical gyrations involved or math magic, however you want to look at it, just step back, take a deep breath, and think your way through it. Remember, keep it simple and you'll do fine. The next time we get together, we're going to be jumping into chapter 10. Talk to everybody later. Good night.